school in session at Belmont Park. Good deal of finality hanging in the air. You can see it with the fall foliage and some of the trees that have already gone barren as the Big A approaches this coming Wednesday. We say goodbye to Belmont Park, but not before we recap Andy Serling and Jason Blewitt Breeders' Cup 32, and what a Breeders' Cup it was. And American Pharoah went out with just a huge exclamation point, what will be a legendary Hall of Fame inductee.
And certainly a picturesque setting at Keeneland. Keeneland plays well on TV for the Breeders' Cup, no doubt about it. And obviously, American Pharoah is the big story. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about these Breeders' Cup races. We should show him.
We should. We wish we had the MiG here, but he is on his way back to the Big Apple. We'll catch up with him opening week at the Big A. Here we go, Breeders' Cup Classic 32. Field of 8 after a couple of early defections, and American Pharoah, as is his wont, right to the lead early beneath Victor Espinoza. And surprisingly, FNX was the one that picked up the chase.
Well, it's because there was no speeds left in the race. I mean, you know, there are things you have to talk about. Listen, I'm always going to try to be a voice of reason in these things. And the reality is, when Liam's Map made a very unfortunate decision to run in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, you took out perhaps the second-best horse in the country. Maybe the second-best horse in the country was Beholder, and unfortunately she didn't make the race. Now, they did try to make it, and these were horses that had speed. And you know what? Let's give a lot of credit to Mike Smith and Jimmy Jerkins, the connections of FNX, for being the one to decide at least put him in the game. And guess what? It resulted in him finishing second. But when a horse of the talent of American Pharoah, Jason, is allowed to set a controlled pace, then they become unbeatable, and those are the kind of races that result in very fast performances, and this race got a 120 buyer. And
this was a second highest buyer ever. There's been a couple of other horses that have fired 120 buyers and winning the Classic. Black Tie Affair comes to mind. Ghost Zapper leads the pack, though, with a buyer 124, but this was an effort in which Bob Baffert had American Pharoah. I get the pace advantage and the fact there was no early speed, but we need to give Bob Baffert, aside from the horse, a good amount of credit along with the team, because they had AP as good as human hands could possibly make a thoroughbred.
And American Pharoah, the greatness of his year is that he ran an arduous campaign, and he ran incredibly well in all of his races, including the Travers, where he lost. And that's the credit to him. It's, you know, his performance on the racetrack overall, individually, were not necessarily great performances per se. It was the greatness of his campaign together. And listen, I'm critical of him, and I want to see him get tested. And I'm sorry Liam's Map wasn't in here, and that's a longer, different discussion. But the fact is that he passed some very significant tests. And you and I talked about Holy Bull, who was able to withstand far more pressure the Travers than American Pharoah did and still win the race. But Holy Bull didn't run the Triple Crown. He ran in the Derby.
Yep.
Things didn't work out. It blew up in his face, whether his fault or not, and they didn't run the Triple Crown races. And we love Holy Bull. And I'm going to say at the end of the day, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't a more talented horse, because frankly, we'll never get to know what either one of them could have done as a 4-year-old. But as good as he was, American Pharoah, he won the Triple Crown. Maybe it was circumstance, but nobody did it, Jason, in 37 years.
You have to appreciate this horse's durability and the fact that he danced every dance. And when I think of the job that Bob Baffert, as I stated, did getting this horse back, who had that serious injury at the end of his 2-year-old campaign, I can still remember sitting down in Johnny I's office at Aqueduct, and someone was talking to somebody who was based out in Southern California last winter, and they said, the scuttlebutt is American Pharoah's finished. He's never going to run again. And you know what? Run again he did. He showed up in Arkansas, ran the table and winning the Rebel in the Arkansas Derby, and the rest was history. And I do want to thank the connections. First, let's thank American Pharoah. Great horse.
Takes a good horse to make a lot of people look smart. There's no doubt about it.
No question. But that being said, Bob Baffert and the Zayats were about as gracious and just as open and friendly as connections could be in the sport in sharing this horse with America.
And the Zayats can be lightning rods sometimes. In racing, some people are their fans or not fans. I get along very well with them, as I know you do also. But whether we want to say these people, they did the right thing by this horse and by horse racing with him. They raced him, they brought him to Saratoga, he danced all the dances, and yeah, I mean, the talk of saying he's the best horse of all time or he's this or that, it's distraction from what really matters. And what really matters is he's a sensational horse that a lot of people got to appreciate. I'll be honest with you, Jason, my biggest criticism of the Breeders' Cup being at Keeneland was that American Pharoah, a Triple Crown winner, finally shows up in the Breeders' Cup and only only 28,000 people could be in the building, and those are people that bought tickets before he won the Triple Crown. If it had been at so many other tracks, 75,000 people could have been there to see them. That's my biggest criticism. And if that's your criticism, it shows what kind of attraction a horse like American Pharaoh is.
He'll be Horse of the Year, 3-year-old champion. He'll be a first ballot Hall of Fame inductee, and it was a wild ride and a campaign, who knows, we may never see, considering the 37-year gap between Affirmed in 78 and American Pharaoh this past June, and horses just don't compile as many starts as they used to. The foal crop has shrunk down from what it was back in the 70s. Who knows if you're ever going to see a Triple Crown winner again?
You'll see Triple Crown winners. I think it's just happenstance, and it's shocking statistically to look at the number of horses that didn't win it. But here's my question. Are they going to be horses that ran 5 races in a period of 12 weeks, and then they come back and run the Haskell, the Travers, and the Breeders' Cup Classic? That's another question, because it seems like some of these horses disappear. And if you put his whole campaign together, he had... It's not a question of greatness. It's remarkable what he achieved this year. And you know what? The racing world enjoyed it. A lot of people enjoyed it, and that's a terrific thing.
And it's a little bittersweet as we say so long and best of luck in retirement. Thank you for the memories, American Pharaoh, as we got to pick up the pace. In fact, I wish we could talk about the Classic for a half hour. But let's move on to Friday's richest race, the Breeders' Cup Distaff, in which this turned out to be a good, wide battle between Stop Charging Maria, who keeps on giving, and Stellar Wind, who showed up with a good effort as a 3-year-old coming in from California.
Yeah, I had a lot to say about this race. You know, this is a show where we're going to talk about some terrific trainers, Bob Baffert, Todd Pletcher, and Chad Brown. And Todd Pletcher and the job he's done with Stop Charging Maria is nothing short of remarkable as well. And as you say, she's not a flashy type. She's never run particularly fast races. Nobody's going to mistake her for Rachel Alexandra. But what she is a horse that shows up with her lunch pail every time she comes to the racetrack and runs a darn good race. And there's a lot to be said for that, especially in this division, which has been a little mediocre. But you know what? She won big races at 3 at Saratoga, and she won big races at 4. She did them in Saratoga, but she did it where it mattered. And Stellar Wind, I walk away from this with only one disappointment. We wanted so much to see Stellar Wind run in the Coaching Club American Oaks and or Alabama and Saratoga, and I feel like those were such big races, and maybe it's selfishness. I wish we saw her there, but this was an exciting race between 2 nice horses.
Yeah, no one will mistake this for a Breeders' Cup Distaff for the ages or a vintage edition, but it turned out to be a good stretch battle. They all stayed safe and sound, and with Stop Charging Maria, as Todd Pletcher won his 9th Breeders' Cup race, Javier Castellano won his 6th, and Kiki Cortellis, who's thrown around quite a bit of money for Town and Country Farms, fairly new owner at the upper echelon of the game. It was nice seeing her get a major coveted Grade 1 prize. My question to you, and even forgetting about the winner for a second, Stellar Wind second, who's your 3-year-old filly champion?
I don't know, because as we're going to see, you know, Cavording didn't hit the board in the Breeders' Cup in the sprint, so she really can't be in the discussion. I'm a Chatterbox stunk it up in this race. Lady Eli gets back in the discussion. Maybe it's Stellar Wind. It's an interesting discussion. I don't have a vote. I don't have to worry about it.
I don't have a vote either. I wonder if Found garnered some attention as well, winning the Breeders' Cup Turf.
Yeah, I like that.
That just hit me. Let's move on to Found, as Europeans and the Euros held a strong hand going in. Golden Horn, the ARC winner, taking the lead beneath Frankie Dettori in the red cap, but Found would not be denied. This filly is a machine.
She's tremendous. She runs every 2 weeks. It's amazing what she's done, because don't forget, when Golden Horn was winning the ARC, she had significant trouble in that ARC. She came back 2 weeks later and finished a very good second at Champions Day, and then 2 weeks later she comes over in here. It reminded me of All Along and what she did, where she's all over the world. She's in Europe, she's here, and running well. Golden Horn's probably the better horse at the end of the day, but Found's not far behind. She got it done today. How about the Chad Brown, Big Blue Kitten, a horse that started his career in claiming races? He finishes a close third, and without his wide trip, he might have been the winner of this race. And how about Slumber? He took over this year, and the kind of results he had this year. He was 3rd and 4th in here, but Chad Brown left an indelible mark on this Breeders' Cup Turf.
And won 2 races. It was a 2 for Breeders' Cup for quite a few connections, but I've been bowled over. My respect for Chad as a trainer and his operation has only widened over the years, but coming off a fall meet in which he enters the final day of racing with the Belmont fall record, at least what I think is a record, at 35 victories, and the job that he did Friday and Saturday with his Breeders' Cup horses, especially Big Blue Kitten and Slumber, is just an effort I won't soon forget. Ryan Moore, by the way, picking up a couple Breeders' Cup wins with trainer Aidan O'Brien. And speaking of Chad, let's move on. Ryan Moore rode terrifically well, as did Erod Ortiz, who's got the red and white Ramsey silks, and she'll outfinish Stephanie's Kitten, the big favorite, the Euro, in the filly Mare Turf.
Stephanie's Kitten beats Legatissimo, the big favorite here, and Ryan Moore rode that horse and rode her perfectly. But you know what? Arad Ortiz was on a horse that just ran a little bit better because Arad rode perfectly as well, and it's incredible. Stephanie's Kitten in 2011 as a 2-year-old won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf race. Now, a filly turf race. Now, that's never going to be mistaken for a true championship race, but still, to come back and win the Breeders' Cup 4 years later as a 6-year-old and sort of pepper the rest of her career with Grade 1s, including 2 straight Flower Bowls, what a job Chad's done with her, and you know what? What a horse.
Arad Ortiz, again, the nice ride, and she is just hickory. She's got the longest winning Breeders' Cup gap in history, having gone the 4 years, as you noted, from the Juvenile Fillies Turf at Churchill Downs, and it was the right ride with the trainer that just had her as good as she could be, and we'll see if the Ramseys leave her in that Facing Tipton sale. She is entered as a broodmare prospect.
Well, they tried to sell her last year. They ended up buying her back, and it ended up being a very good decision. And don't forget, Jay, she was second in it last year, but she probably ran the best race behind the slow pace set by Day at the Spa, her uncoupled stablemate.
Right, 2 consecutive BC Filly Mare Turf wins for Chad Brown, and we'll talk about Chad's win with Wavell Avenue in the Filly Mare Sprint, and how about Tepin beating the world's best milers on Saturday. All that and more here on the Racing Report. Just about ready to take that 8-mile drive down the Bell Parkway as we have Aqueduct's Fall Meet, always a good one, opening up this coming Wednesday, November 4th. We roll back the first race post, 12:20 p.m., a 9-race offering on November 4th, and a pretty solid card. You and I were just talking off camera, and it's a card that includes a couple of nice graded stakes for the 2-year-olds.
I agree. We get to see Welcoming in the Tempted. We get to see Mohey Man in the Nashua. Going to be a very, very good day of racing. 3 turf races on the card, an excellent 7th race allowance race. Join us for Wednesday. It's going to be great to be back at the Big A. A lot of good racing, especially that first month, the main track. You see some terrific races.
And the 2-year-olds are still kind of figuring themselves out on this circuit, and we'll talk more, I think, as a whole, the juvenile division and the scope as we get closer to the BC Juvenile in the 3rd segment. But Tepin is up next as Mark Casse, who was 0 for 23 in Breeders' Cup races before winning the Juvenile Fillies Turf on Friday, ran a Bernstein 4-year-old who, it's amazing the kind of horse she's developed into.
Had an incredible year. Mark Cass did an amazing job with her. I tell you, I never was a believer of this horse. Couldn't have made a bigger fool of myself in thinking she had absolutely no chance in this race. Not only did she win this race, she won it in a laugher, about as easy as you could win. And listen, this turf course in a way reminds me a little of Aqueduct. Sometimes it gets kind of funky. Some horses take to it, many don't. Mm-hmm. And clearly she was helped by the course that she took to, ran so well a few weeks ago and came back and ran well, and I do think a lot of horses struggled to handle it, and I think it's an untold story, this Breeders' Cup. This course really was tough for a lot of horses, but you know what? That doesn't change the kind of year that Tepin had and the kind of job that Mark Casse and his team did with this horse. An amazing year and a terrific racehorse.
Wonder if she'll be Filly Turf champion or female Turf champion, because Stephanie's Kitten will rightfully garner some votes. It's actually a fairly interesting discussion.
That is an interesting discussion, actually. And, she finished ahead of Stephanie's Kitten at Saratoga, and I wouldn't be surprised if she gets it over Stephanie's Kitten. That's an interesting discussion. She did beat the boys in this race.
Mondia Lee's second best, coming in off a Woodbine Mile race you had covered north of the border with Fox, and that horse ran well in his second start in the United States. As we backtrack to Friday's card and get onto the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, a poor start for Liam's Vap, the number 3, put him behind the 8 ball and in a spot we had never seen him before.
No, this was a sensational performance by him, as you say. Broke about 3/4 of a length slow. He put himself in a good spot, but keep in mind, he's now behind horses eating dirt, and they're going pretty good up front. 23, 46, and 1. And the other thing is, you get a little bit rank. You see his head right there, and he tries to go between horses. You're going to see him steady again, and it really just didn't seem to matter what kind of trouble he encountered, Jason. And, I've become a huge fan of this horse. I had never thought he was that good. I thought we'd never see him again after he disappeared in Florida. Mm-hmm. And here he is going between horses still steady, Jay. But I have turned into a gigantic fan of this horse. And he showed in this race he certainly doesn't need everything to go his own way. And he got to run a big race. He got a 114 buyer. But I'm going to say it, Jay.
Yeah.
There was little discussion, I think, about how this horse belonged in the Classic. And I will never forget this Breeders' Cup weekend by saying what could have been, because he and American Pharoah should have settled it on the racetrack together. Now, maybe American Pharoah would have beaten him, and there's certainly a good chance he would have, but they deserve to do it in the racetrack, and top racehorses need to race together. The Breeders' Cup has watered down our racing during the year, and if they're going to water down their own racing by putting other races in there, then they're doing a disservice to the game, and this was a disservice service of the game at a high level that a horse of this quality was not in the Classic. He and American Pharaoh should not be retiring, not having a chance to settle it on the racetrack.
Yeah, well said, and it's a shame in a way Liam's Map just coming into his own in the 4-year-old campaign that he had for Todd Pletcher. He just drives away.
Like Lee!
Lee is a top-class, world-class racehorse on turf and dirt, and I'm thinking at the quarter pole and even after the race, as I say it now, the effort Lee put forth in running second on Friday is probably an effort that wins just about every Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile they've run since its inception back in 07.
It's certainly a discussion, and he's in hand. I mean, it's a joke. Lee, you're absolutely right. Lee ran a giant winning race in here on the pace the whole way, and Liam's Map, with trouble, mocked him. And Liam's Map is a superior racehorse, but he's not going to be remembered the way he could have been, and I think that's unfortunate. To me, the Breeders' Cup Mile is not a race that's ever going to be anything but an afterthought.
It's just watered down the Classic, and at times it's watered down the Breeders' Cup Sprint as well. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Sprint, speaking of the fastest horses in the country, and this is just one of these stories. Where else do you get a plot and story like the one we've gotten with Maria Burrell and this colt by Super Saver named Run Happy than you do in the sport of thoroughbred racing?
You guys like to say a good horse can come from anywhere, and you know what? You may never have heard her before the Breeders' Cup, but everybody's heard of her now. It's a great story. It's a wonderful racehorse, and you know what? He rated behind horses here. Yes, it was a classically good trip, but he was a horse that seemed to need to control races, and he's running down a horse in Private Zone, who's one of the best horses running in racing. This is just a terrific racehorse, and as you say, Jay, a terrific story.
Yeah, I mean, I could still flash back to the day the Travers with American Pharaoh was drawn in the undercard and going, man, who's this horse coming in from Indiana Downs and Ellis Park? And this trainer, Maria Burrell, I mean, she's only run, 3 horses on the year, and all 3 of them are won. In fact, Run Happy, I think, is one of only 2 horses in her care, and the rest is history. This horse winning for the 5th consecutive time, and he broke better than he did in the Phoenix, and I think that was one of the telltale signs how he moved forward off his prep race.
Just a terrific racehorse, and you know what? His race on Travers Day was the best race a 3-year-old ran that day.
And Edgar Prado turning back the clock. He has been a match made in heaven with Run Happy as we get on to Wavell Avenue in the Filly Mare Sprint. And off that notion that a good horse can come from anywhere, there were 2 Breeders' Cup winners that began their careers running in maiden claiming races, and one of them happened to be Wavell Avenue, who's coming on the outside in the yellow.
I watched that maiden claiming race with Chad and said, you're going to lose her and you're going to regret it. Fortunately, he did not lose her, and she could probably not develop this horse without Chad.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, this is one of my few good opinions on the Breeders' Cup cards. I liked her. One of the reasons I liked her is I expected a meltdown, a fast pace here. It didn't happen. She didn't get a fast pace. She didn't get a meltdown. Laverdad ran absolutely terrific, and I think she is the leader of this older filly and mare sprint division at the end of the year. But the truth is that Wavell Avenue, despite not having dynamics in her favor, still blew by the field. This was a tour de force.
4-year-old filly by Harlington, and who would have thunk it a few weeks ago? The Gallant Bloom exacta with Laverdad over Wavell Avenue was basically a carbon copy come Saturday in front of 50,000.
You certainly wouldn't have thought it a week ago when Laverdad was winning on the New York Bred Showcase Day.
All right, the second of 2 Chad Brown winners, but when we come back, Uncle Mo, like father, like son, with Nyquist. Back to Belmont Park, our final look at the Palace, a great fall championship season, so a lot of good racing, and we propel forward to Aqueduct. And for me, it's about Holiday Fest and the 2-year-old program moving over to Queens.
For me, it's being able to be closer to you during the day and hanging out in the office and having a good time. You know, it's with mixed emotions we leave Belmont. I kind of wish today was freezing and windy so I could say, boy, I can't wait to get to the cozy confines of Aqueduct. It's actually a beautiful day here at Belmont as we film this, so it makes it a little sadder to leave.
This might be the first racing report out of the last 3 or 4 we don't have winter jackets on the 3rd floor set. Let's move it ahead, though, as we get back out to the action with Saturday's Classic Breeders' Cup card and focus in on Nyquist, who ran his record to a perfect 5 for 5, swinging wide off the far turn in the white cap. And this horse, despite the post and the fact everybody, including myself, thought he was very workmanlike in winning the front runner, got it done on Saturday.
We all agreed after his race out in California that it was just a horse that was good, but probably distance challenged, and didn't like this horse coming out of the race in California. Even Richie was on board with us. We turned out to be about as wrong as you could be. The horses that ran 1-2 in the front runner, they ran 1-2 again, and Nyquist He had the year. He's the 2-year-old champion, undisputed. But you know what? He also ran a second slower than the filly division did. Not a surprise. A lot of no-shows. Greenpoint Crusader was running a little wide at the end, but he never got involved in the race at all. He's a better horse than that, Jay.
I just think, and it'll be the popular opinion, I don't think we're looking at a classic winner, or certainly Kentucky Derby winner coming out of Saturday's Juvenile.
I tell you what, unless horses completely turn around, it wasn't fast enough to be even close.
All right, Doug O'Neill's already been to the big dance. Well, I'll have another a few years back for Redham Racing as Nyquist gets back to the winner's circle with Mario Gutierrez. And we move on to Songbird, who, even forgetting about gender for a second, her season this year for Jerry Hollendorfer has been one of the most dominant 2-year-old campaigns I can remember. She is a monster.
No, right now she is the single best 2-year-old in the country. It's not 2-year-old colt or filly or whatever the case may be. She is the best 2-year-old. She went out and she went fast, just as she did last time the whole way around. I mean, Rachel's Valentina, who's a very good horse and ran well to be second, beaten 5 3/4, beaten 5 3/4 length, finishing almost a second behind her. She had to go into almost a drive on the backstretch just to keep up with Songbird, and Songbird is just sort of prancing along with Mike Smith on the front end. You talk about a dominating winner and an exciting racehorse. You've got Songbird. I just hope we don't get deluged by people saying she should be running the Triple Crown races.
Yes.
Let's appreciate her for what she is and stop worrying about whether or not she's heading towards the Kentucky Derby.
The red and white of Fox Hill Farm, and the guy that just keeps giving us more, Mike Smith. Thrills and memories, 22 Breeders' Cup victories and counting. And I think back to the first Breeders' Cup I ever watched as a fan in 1993. Mike at the time basically was in the pinnacle of his career and was one of the mainstays and leading riders on this circuit, and the guy's still getting it done in 2015.
No, he's terrific, and I think the one thing that sticks out with Mike Smith is he does not get in the way of his horses. He doesn't have some sort of ego that says, no, I know how to ride this horse. Mike sees a horse. If it's a speed horse, he goes. If it's a closer, he rates him. Mike fits himself to a horse, and that's something that not every rider can say.
And we have just seen the proliferation of Jerry Hollendorfer and the string he's been able to build out in Southern California. Tremendous Hall of Fame trainer, and he's got a very good one in Songbird, as does Aidan O'Brien, at least regarding the turf, and a furious finish by Hit It a Bomb, who did have little trouble overcoming an outside draw.
Well, it's a great ride by Ryan Moore, but he had the goods. And this was one of the Europeans, despite 2 races, one on turf and a 20-horse field and a 4-horse blanket photo, and then a small field on synthetic. All the Euros said, this is a superstar in the making, and boy, were they right. This horse can really run, but it also took a terrific ride by Ryan Moore. It's a nice horse. I enjoy these races, Jay. They're fun handicapping puzzles. I rarely seem to win them. I enjoy watching them. They shouldn't be championship races.
No, and the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint I'll mention in the same breath as a non-championship race in my mind. I get the Grade 1 status, but I just think there's too many, and it's a discussion for a later time. There's just too many Breeders' Cup races
No,
now.
I agree. The 2 days is a little bit difficult for people. 1 day is a little bit easier to handle. It's one thing to have championship races. Why not have the championship races on Saturday?
Yeah.
And then have fun races like this. If you want to put up $1 million or $500,000, it's about driving handle. I get it. It's a business, but they're not championship races, and let's not pretend that they are. They're still pretty good horses, and maybe this horse will go on and do some championship quality things.
We hope so. Kentucky-bred colt by Warfront. A number of the nation's top stallions won races on Friday and Saturday. I'm curious to see what Warfront will be standing for in 2016. Stood for $150,000 this past year. As we go to the girls in the BC Juvenile Fillies turf and catch a glimpse, overachieving filly by City Zip for Gary Barber and Mark Cassie. She was very good in this race.
She was. Now keep in mind, she set over a second slower pace than the winner, than the horse who was the speed horse, who actually finished, Highland Dan finished back in 7th in the juvenile colt race. But you know what? She was able to control at the front end just as she did in her prior race, and she ran a quality race. She's a very nice horse, and once again, another terrific job by Mark Cassie, who had a very good Breeders' Cup. I shouldn't have left him out of the discussion with guys like Bob Baffert, Todd Fletcher, and Chad Brown, because he had a great Breeders' Cup as well.
Yeah, Breeders' Cup double, just like the aforementioned trainers and Mark Cassie. I looked at the stats on Equibase.com Sunday Sunday morning. I think he's 5th in the country in purse money won with over $12 million. Not bad. And Florent Giroux has really had his coming out party, and his stock has gone to the next level, it seems, over the last year.
Well, you want to get noticed? Win some Breeders' Cup races.
Yeah, no kidding. Doing it in front of a crowd on a Saturday, a record crowd, in fact. They had a little over 50,000 on Saturday, and we are down to race 13 of 13 on the National Racing Report. The Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint with Mongolian Saturday, and this horse, once upon a time, debuted for Maiden 25 Kentucky Derby weekend in 2013 at Arlington Park.
I'm still annoyed that my claim was voided that day. The most amazing thing about this race might be that Bobby's Kitten actually finished 4th this year. Everybody, I think you and I are the only guys that didn't like this horse. Apparently everybody had Mongolian Summer. And you know what? He had finished a nose behind a horse that I liked and didn't run at all in here, and that's Pure Sensation, who definitely didn't like the track. You could see him buried down the inside. But Mongolian Saturday's had a terrific year, and I'm going to tell you something. There have been some terrific Winner's Circle celebrations and events in Breeders' Cup history. None better than the Winner's Circle celebration for this race.
There's some great pictures online at bloodhorse.com. They've got some great Winner's Circle photos from Mongolian Saturday. A gelding by any given Saturday as we wrap up at least the 13th Breeders' Cup race with a bit of a rolling double for Florent Giroux and Lady Shipman in defeat. Did she not like the turf? Did she run her race?
She ran terrific in here. He says she got beat a neck. She lost the bob here. She basically had this race won after the wire. Lady Shipman had a terrific year, and you had mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm not so sure she's not a discussion for top 3-year-old.
Right.
She may not win an Eclipse. She might not be one of the top 3, but I think in our hearts as racing fans, Lady Shipman had a sensational year, and she was a big part of enjoying this season.
And she's put the old veteran trainer Kathleen O'Connell front and center, and another terrific story that really emerged during the summer at Saratoga along with Run Happy, and that's the beauty of the game. You just never know when a great story will seemingly come out of left field.
Right. I mean, listen, guys like Marcassi and Todd and Chad and Baffert, they get a lot of expensive horses, a lot of well-bred horses, but there are other good trainers in the game. And you get an opportunity, and a Kathleen O'Connell gets a chance, Maria Borelli, as you point out, they get a chance to get a good horse. They can look pretty good, too.
So American Pharoah heading off to the breeding shed, 9 for 11 lifetime. We'll see what he stands for at Ashford in 2016. What are your thoughts on his campaign as a whole?
Well, he had a remarkable year. You'll never take it away from him, and we can argue about him forever, and I love the argument, and that's what makes racing great, is an argument and a difference of opinion and an honest, intelligent discussion. Puts the game forward, not a decision, and not telling people you need to feel this way about this horse or you're a bad person. That's nonsense. But it's not disputable that he had a great year. He had an absolutely great year, and he finished it up the way he should have, which is by running his fastest race and winning the biggest race at the end of the year. It's just unfortunate that Liam's Map wasn't in there. Obviously, nothing could have been done about Beholder, but it would have been so much better. Imagine him winning a race where he had to deal with Liam's Map speed in there, and Beholder makes a run at him, and then he repels those two horses, and here comes Honor Code, who gets the faster pace to run into, and he holds him off. Imagine how you would have felt after that. And whether or not that would have happened, we'll never know, and it's unfortunate, but it's not American Pharoah's fault because he showed up at all the big dances.
Not sitting too far from his little plaque out in the infield as racing's 12th Triple Crown winner. We thank American Pharoah for the year that he had. We thank him for the memories, the Zayats, Bob Baffert, and Andy and I thank you for tuning in to this latest edition of the Racing Report. We'll see you next Monday and Tuesday from the Big A.